We're live. Put count up a little bit for Cecil to snip. Hopefully we don't have the internet in New Orleans has been terrible.
It seems like it's going in and out a little bit on me.
Oh man. Well, just the show must go on, as always.
For sure.
The show must go on. And welcome everybody. Let's go ahead and go live. Should our faith be shaken in the Tampa Bay offense? That and more this week on the couch. Welcome back to the couch, Mike Tagliere. Mike, what should we take away from Sunday night when it comes to projecting Tampa's offense going forward?
I don't want to take too much away from it. Tom Brady's been around obviously a long time, and we've been waiting for somewhat of a decline, but we hadn't seen it. The previous 5 weeks, I think he'd thrown like 17 touchdowns and 1 interception. So we don't want to take away too much from one game where he was under pressure. 54% of dropbacks. Like on the year, I think it was like 21, 23%, something like that. So Tom Brady has been pretty terrible under pressure. I think everybody knows that. It's kind of a guy with no mobility. He's going to throw the ball into the ground. And I think there was a little bit, do you ever, say, have you ever played Madden?
Yes, it's been a while, but yes.
All right. So when you run like a franchise mode and I know this is a weird, way to put it together, but when you do like a franchise mode and then you do a draft and you draft that number 1 wide receiver, you can't wait to get him in your lineup. And then you kind of overly target him in the first game because you want to get him the ball. I feel like that's exactly what Tom Brady was trying to do a little bit with Antonio Brown. The one was that there was an obvious miscommunication where Brown stopped his route down the sideline. It led to an interception. Even throwing Mike Evans, I don't know what they were trying to do there, forcing the ball twice on fades in the end zone. It just felt like it was a weird game for them. They overcomplicated it. They couldn't stop the Saints pass rush. It was just a perfect storm against them. I think they bounced back especially well this week against Carolina. Carolina is the team that they're sacking quarterbacks, I think, on a league low 2.7% of dropbacks. I know the overall numbers against Carolina haven't been particularly good, but it was one of the reasons I like Patrick Mahomes and like DFS last week, because if you don't get pressure on these quarterbacks that are elite, like Mahomes, like Brady, these guys are going to eat you apart. And Brady's had a much better quarterback rating when he's kept clean in the pocket. So I expect him to bounce back this week, get back to normal.
Yeah, probably. It's going to be interesting. In the second data point for the New Orleans defense, it's probably going to be good because they're playing Nick Mullins this week. And I think that it's a good time to try to get Tom Brady if you don't love your quarterback, just because of his playoff schedule of Minnesota, Atlanta, and Detroit. But as you said, Tampa's offensive line surrendered a ton of pressure, and we know that's always been the key to beating Tom Brady. And then you just wonder, I like to look for narratives where maybe they're not there, Mike. Like adding Antonio Brown actually is going to have the negative effect because of how it's changing something that was working. But we'll see. And we'll see about the receivers because what do you see for the receivers? I mean, is there going to be one of these guys that we can trust week to week? Or is week 9 a preview of a kind of level scoring? Or if there are spike games, that they'll be unpredictable.
It's kind of like the Steelers offense in a way, right? You look at those 3 wide receivers, the Steelers, and you want to start every single one of them, but at some point somebody's going to cannibalize the other one. And, that's going to happen. It just so happens that this week that everybody in the Steelers offense was able to have a good week, including Eric Ebron. You have Rob Gronkowski there. Mike Evans has not seen a steady flow of targets, even with Antonio Brown out of the lineup. He was the one that I thought would take the biggest hit. However, I do want to point out that I already did research for that game this week against Carolina, and Mike Evans over the last few weeks, they've been playing him in the slot a lot more. He's there about 45% of the time. So if he's actually getting slot snaps and he's kind of mixing back and forth with Chris Godwin, I don't think Mike Evans is going to go away, because I was like, Chris Godwin's the one whose role shouldn't be too affected with Antonio Brown, because Brown's going to be a primary perimeter wide receiver. But knowing that Evans and Godwin are switching back and forth, I do think this is going to be a mess every single week trying to figure it out. But at the same time, you have Antonio Brown, a guy that's uber talented. You figure it was going to take a couple weeks for him to get acclimated, learn a new offense. He's obviously worked with Brady only one regular season game. So it's not like they have a long history together. But I do expect him to bounce back at some point. I have them all ranked as top 40 wide receivers for the rest of the season. And you're probably going to be stuck starting them considering, the upside that they present on a weekly basis. But it's going to be a little bit frustrating in fantasy.
It sounds like you think, hey, if someone is unhappy with what they have in Antonio Brown, maybe things will get better. Yeah. Do you think things will get better for Michael Thomas on the other side of that matchup, or are we looking at a more level, wider target tree in New Orleans?
No, I think Michael Thomas is one of the best buy lows. If your trade deadline hasn't passed in fantasy football yet, some of the trade offers that I've actually seen for Michael Thomas are quite ridiculous. This is a guy that was being drafted, top 5 pick in most fantasy leagues, maybe top 8 at worst case scenario. He dealt with some injuries. He was coming back off a 5-week, 6-week absence, whatever it was. He was in a matchup against Carlton Davis, a guy who had his number back in week 1. Carlton Davis is one of the emerging shutdown cornerbacks in the NFL. So we shouldn't take away too much. Again, Michael Thomas was limited in practice throughout the week. He wasn't 100% in that game. The Saints didn't have to do a whole lot. So again, I don't want to take too much away from this. Alvin Kamara's target share is going to come down because that just naturally has to happen. Emmanuel Sanders is going to come down a little bit. Jared Cook, obviously I don't want to say he got benched last week, but he might have. Adam Troutman actually saw 4 targets in that game. So Michael Thomas is going to be fine. I honestly, if I were looking at wide receivers and saying, what wide receivers would I rather have on my roster than Michael Thomas? I think Devontae Adams, that might be the end of conversation. Keenan Allen's up there too. He's someone that I cannot, I've been given crap for having him too high for too long, but I have him as like the number 6 wide receiver in the rest of the season. And I was told I was too high. And I'm like, are you kidding? Every single game he plays with Justin Herbert, the guy's getting 10 targets. And this goes back to the Hard Knocks days. And I mentioned it when we were doing our preseason shows and all that. I said, I was watching Hard Knocks, and I don't like to take away too much from that show because it's a bunch of fluff, whatever. But Justin Herbert walked over to Keenan Allen and he goes, hey man, when I'm in the game, my job is to get the ball to you. You're a stud. You're a playmaker. And he walked over and you could tell he admired Keenan Allen. He understood the player that he had at his disposal and he's getting him the ball. It's just so fun to watch those two. And Justin Herbert has been so much better than I thought he would be coming in. The Chargers offensive line has done a better job than I thought that they would do. But Keenan Allen's been a stud.
Yeah, Herbert. And it's a good example. It's funny, Mike, like, during the season, I feel like I have the most clarity of actually looking back to our thoughts on range of outcomes for players back in August and where we were very misguided or just things happened that we couldn't see coming. And with the Chargers, talk about fate, that hitting the lung with the injection set in motion a chain of events. For all we know, Tyrod Taylor might still be starting right now if that hadn't happened.
Yep.
It changed the outlook for Herbert. Herbert's been an elite fantasy quarterback, but even Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, there's a lot of things that have changed. So going back, looking big picture, let's get off the micro of week 9, week 10. Mm-hmm. When you look back, tell me what things you feel like you were most right about.
One of the things I was most right about, and I was almost hesitant to believe in it because I didn't know what to expect because there were so many variables in it, was Robbie Anderson. Robbie Anderson was I didn't like Robbie Anderson with the Jets. I really didn't like him at all. He didn't have a consistent role, but when he got consistent opportunity, he was someone that you could rely on. It seeming like at the end of the season, it was like, okay, now let's give the guy volume. And it's like, where's this all been? So when Matt Rule, they have a connection there at Temple. When he brought him over, I was like, there's a reason he's bringing him over. I don't know what it is yet because there's so many guys involved here. You tried to figure it out, but every single time I sat down and I did my preseason projections, Robbie Anderson kept popping up as a top 40 wide receiver, which, it sounds like nothing right now, but people weren't drafting him as a top 50 wide receiver. And he kept showing up inside there. And I was like, what am I missing here? And, everybody was predicting a DJ Moore breakout, and it's kind of been flip-flopped. And even going back over like the last 4 or 5 games, actually back to the start, I think of week 4, right. DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel, the terms of opportunities those guys have gotten has been basically the exact same. So it's really difficult for those who really look forward to DJ Moore because he is a really good football player. And I expected him to be the number 1 on this team, but Robbie Anderson was never chopped liver. He was just left for dead because of the way that he was used in New York. So it's good to see him get an opportunity this year.
Yeah, there's a lot to tease apart from that. I like that one too with Robbie Anderson. There were a lot of receivers that it just seemed odd that they were going in the 15th round or later. Yeah. Corey Davis was another one. Sammy Watkins was another one. Just based on their situation or what we knew about them in the past, there was at least some hope. But with Robbie Anderson, you can tease apart the Gase effect. And I guess until further notice, Mike, when players leave Gase, Le'Veon Bell notwithstanding, but generally, it really gets to the heart of the assumption of rational coaching where we liked Robbie Anderson as a deep threat, and that was a very inconsistent usage for him, except for a stretch there at the end of 2018. And he goes and rejoins his college coach, and now he's used on short routes. And he's used as a run after catch threat, and he's used to keep the offense on schedule. So since you brought up the Carolina offense, What do we do with DJ Moore? Because he had a 3-week stretch where he was hot. The last 2 weeks, it's been Curtis Samuel. Is this a moment to try to unload DJ Moore because this is a new reality and maybe somebody thinks it's not and DJ Moore is going to be fine? Or is it the opposite? Or do we just shrug our shoulders?
Yeah, you kind of have to stick with him right now just because you'd be selling at an all-time low. Coming into last week, I don't know if the projections in terms of like what he's on pace for now, but most people would be amazed to know. I know that Dan in our podcast, he was like, "Are you kidding me?" I said before this week, DJ Moore is actually on pace to score more fantasy points in 2020 than he did in 2019. And everybody's like, no way. And I'm like, I swear, it's less receptions. It's bigger splash plays. It's more touchdowns. And that's basically what he was missing in 2019. The touchdowns just weren't there, but he had tons of receptions that basically made up for him getting into like the top 15, top 12 wide receiver. I don't think you want to get rid of him. Curtis Samuel is a guy that it seems like Matt Rule and Joe Brady have figured out how to use Curtis Samuel to his strengths. Whereas last year he was kind of miscast in a role. They kept on trying to stretch the field with him. I remember everybody talking about the air yards, and the reason that you had to play Curtis Samuel is because of this, that. He was miscast in that role, and it just didn't work. It's kind of like what we're seeing with Henry Ruggs right now. Henry Ruggs with the Raiders, he's being miscast as a deep threat only, and that's not the player that he is. And it's really disappointing that they drafted a guy that they're unwilling to use to his strengths. Now that they've figured out Curtis Samuel's strengths, now that Robbie Anderson is garnering attention, DJ Moore is going to benefit from that. So they gave a game with the Bucs this week where Carlton Davis probably would have shadowed someone like DJ Moore, back in week 2. They did not shadow that week. They actually played sides, but that's something that we always had to worry about with DJ Moore. Fortunately, we don't have to anymore. The matchup against the Chiefs last week, do not worry about that. I told people going into that matchup, it was a bust spot for DJ Moore, and everybody wanted to attack it from a DFS standpoint. But every single week I tell people, stop attacking Kansas City's defense, because all they want to say is this team's going to fall behind. They're going to throw the ball a lot. It's going to be huge. You come from behind. No. If you go back to the start of 2019, since Kansas City switched to this 4-3 defense, they have allowed the fewest yards per game to wide receivers. And guess what? The Chiefs have blown everybody out along the way. So it's not a matchup that you wanted to target. So DJ Moore's struggles in that game don't surprise me. This matchup against the Bucs isn't a great matchup for a ceiling. However, he did catch 8 balls for 120 yards against them back in week 2. So
right.
I don't want to sell low on DJ Moore. He's too talented of a football player. It's unfortunate that we have to move him our expectations down into like wide receiver 3 territory, but I'm not willing to move on just yet.
And Detroit and Minnesota are coming up after Tampa. So that sounds good for Moore. Although, I got a question. So I'm tuning into your Sunday morning show, Mike, and I say, do I play DJ Moore or Curtis Samuel this week?
It's still DJ Moore for me. Curtis Samuel, he is getting up there, and it's really difficult for me to continue standing by that. It's a conversation that we had on our podcast because, Yates told me, he's like, I continue moving DJ Moore down. I'm like, well, how close do you have it between DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel? Because Samuel's has crept up into that wide receiver 4 territory where I don't think that he's a must play every single week, because we can't forget he's only top 50 yards one time. And it was last week against the Chiefs, and kind of that pseudo hybrid role where they're using him as a running back / wide receiver, getting him the ball. They're manufacturing touches for Curtis Samuel, which is a good thing. And it's great against that Kansas City Chiefs zone-based defense. Now going over to DJ Moore, it's really frustrating because he has seen in between 4 and 6 targets, I think in each of the 6 of the last 7 games. So he's not getting the big target share, but in a matchup against the Bucs where they're not going to be able to run the ball. You do not run the ball against Tampa Bay. They allow less than 2.8 yards per carry on the season. We saw the Saints struggle last week. The Saints actually, they rushed for, I think, 81 or 89 yards. That was the most they've allowed to running backs all season. So they're not going to be able to run the ball. Christian McCaffrey might not be able to play this game. So I would expect the targets to be back there for DJ Moore this week. So I'm still going to ride out DJ Moore here, whereas Curtis Samuel is more of the floor play as a guy that you're playing to get a floor. You're not necessarily chasing a ceiling with him.
I think if I am seeing you connect the dots there, it's all 3 of those receivers can be good plays.
Yeah.
Kind of like a Pittsburgh scenario last week where the answer is all the above. Now, the last thing, pivoting off of Robbie Anderson, Rashad Perryman. It was actually surprisingly entertaining game last night. Rashad Perryman, and we did an extended thing on our waiver wire show this morning, Mike. Rashad Perryman is a good wide receiver. He's not just a size, speed guy that you hope he can make the play. He has skills. He just can't stay healthy. You don't love picking up players going into their bye. How eager are you to get Perryman and see what comes from him in the second half of the season? Or do you feel like this is something to let someone else take care of because it's Rashad Perryman and it won't last?
Yeah, I really don't want to attach myself to any Jets players. I just think there's too much inconsistency there. Jamison Crowder didn't play a massive role in that game. That was the first game, by the way, that Jamison Crowder has played and seen fewer than 10 targets. So it's very concentrated in that game. Joe Flacco was clearly on something. He was on a roll. Flacco looked like he went back to the playoffs when he won a Super Bowl. Perryman, it almost seemed like the Patriots cornerbacks, and this is something that happens with those big wide receivers, right? It's almost like they underestimated his speed. They waited for him to get on them, and by the time they turned, it was just too late, and he got behind him. Flacco, again, delivered the ball deep perfectly, but I don't have any faith in Adam Gase calling an offense anymore. We've been there. Robbie Anderson's a great football player, much better than someone like Rashad Perryman, and he couldn't even make it work in this offense. So I would rather let someone else take that chance. And I did look at that, and I was like, he's on his bye, so you really don't want to carry him through that. And then I'm like, all right, well, what's his matchup? Once he gets outside of that bye, and it's against the Chargers, so he's probably going to see Casey Hayward a lot of the time on the perimeter, while Jamison Crowder moves into the slot, while they don't have Desmond King anymore because they traded him away. So I don't know, because I don't think I could ever confidently start Rashad Perriman. And fortunately, he's going to be available on the waiver wire for you to pick up.
Yeah, maybe pick him up for matchups, and we'll see if Joe Flacco gets any more starts. He might fit better with Flacco. They play together, and Sam Darnold hasn't been consistent. But maybe next year, maybe he'll land on a team next year where he can stay healthy and be consistent because there's skills there. It was fun to watch him. It was fun to watch Jakobi Meyers. How much are we buying this from Jakobi Meyers? Is this if he's still on the waiver wire, empty your wallet? Are we seeing basically what Julian Edelman would have been doing, or did we chalk this up to the Jets?
That's exactly what I want people to look at this as. You remember back in weeks 1 and 2 where Julian Edelman, we looked at him and we said, Julian Edelman, he's total career high, 179 yards in week 2. It's like, oh, Cam Newton, that's what we needed to unlock Julian Edelman. Then all of a sudden, a couple weeks go by and the honeymoon phase wears off, and Cam Newton, declines as a passer, and you're kind of like, oh, what did I do? And then people are dropping him. They were dropping him before he even had that surgery on his knee. So that wasn't a new thing. So Jakobi Meyers, I like the player Jakobi Meyers. I liked him last year. I loved it when Edelman was ruled as like a questionable start. I was like, oh, let Jakobi Meyers go in there and play, because he is a player. Unfortunately, Cam Newton is too streaky of a passer to trust week in, week out. And, when you have a receiver on the perimeter like Meyers, because he was a guy that played a lot of slot snaps last year, but now he's playing majority of his snaps on the perimeter with Cam Newton. And Newton looked good as a passer last night, but let's not forget, it was the Jets. We don't want to give too much credit for a good game against the Jets. He looked solid as a passer. We need Cam Newton to ride that confidence, because that's what makes him a good quarterback. When Cam Newton struggles with confidence, he's done. Like he's out of the game. He's lost it. So Meyers is going to be a bit streaky. I don't know if I want to rely on him week in, week out, because again, I try not to tie myself to teams that are low scoring offenses. They're low volume offenses. We know that's what the Patriots are. And then they have a streaky quarterback who doesn't constantly deliver accurate passes. And, unfortunately, Julian Edelman, again, we go back to that and say in weeks 1 and 2, it looked genius to draft him as a borderline wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 in fantasy drafts. We thought he was the boring receiver. He was going to give you boring production. And then I was like, we have more than that. And then all of a sudden we see 6 targets, couple catches in every game for like 30 yards. So I don't want to go overboard for Jakobi Meyers, but while Cam Newton's running hot in good matchups, you could play him.
Yeah, looking ahead, Houston, Baltimore this week, maybe not good. Houston, Arizona, Chargers after that, Rams, Miami, tougher. So you're right. Your spots with Meyers. I think he might be more exciting for Dynasty, honestly.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because he looks like he's better than N'Keal Harry. It happens. Yes. It happens. You take a wide receiver in the first round, you get an undrafted free agent, then drafted free agent's better. It happens sometimes. At least that kind of cancels each other out. Okay, so back to the big picture. Who's somebody that stands out when I say, who were you wrong about this year?
Who was I wrong about? Kenyon Drake.
No.
AJ Green. Those are the two that stand out to me most. And so the thing is I wanted to go back, and this is I wrote a version. So I write the primer every week, and I write that paragraph on every player. But this year, what I wanted to do, and I almost called it my diary, but they said let's just make it the primer draft day edition. I was like, whatever, I don't really care. The idea was to get your thoughts out there on why you liked players, right? And I wanted people to understand the range of outcomes and why I liked them and the process behind everything. That's why I write the primer every week. So Kenyon Drake, I got to the point where people are like, are you ready to say he's a bust yet? And I'm like, yeah, but if I go back to the process, it was correct. It's still correct because this is a high scoring offense. He's still getting, I think at the time he was getting 77% of the touches, which is unheard of for running backs in today's NFL. He was the lack of uses in the passing game. I don't think anyone could have predicted that. That was something that he was heavily involved in last year and something I relied on. So that was a miss. And then AJ Green was someone that I said, he's not going to kill you by drafting him in the 8th or 9th round, wherever he was going. But if he hits, I think AJ Green can turn into an every week wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. Unfortunately, it's T. Higgins who has become that player. And T. Higgins has been a stud ever since he got into the starting lineup. T. Higgins is a top 12 fantasy wide receiver. I'm not saying that you should value him like that moving forward, but clearly the kid's a stud. He's tied to Joe Burrow. I mean, him and Tyler Boyd, those guys in Dynasty, they should be considered top 15 wide receivers right now because they're tied to Joe Burrow for a long time, which is fantastic news for them. Zach Taylor's probably not going to go anywhere. They need to strengthen up that offensive line. But yeah, AJ Green and Kenyon Drake. But again, going back to even AJ Green, if you were to tell people before the season that he'd be leading the league in air yards through 4 weeks and that he'd have X amount of targets, again, the process was correct. It's just the player didn't live up to my expectations is all that happened, and they were extremely inefficient. So those are my two biggest misses that strike me like, damn, I wish I could take those back. But at the same time, we have to live the whole process over results life.
Yeah, and then the thing is, in the course of a season, because we've already talked about some of these seasons like Cam Newton, within a season, ups and downs. And as I like to say, Mike, we can be right and wrong in the same season. Sometimes within the same game, we can be right and wrong. Things can unfold exactly the way we said they would, but then that risk factor that we downplayed pops up. And I think with Green, and I'm always going to be a sucker for players like Green, because I absolutely went down with the ship with Green because and when it's a truly great player with a capital G, I'm not going to believe that they're going to go out there and look like a shell of themselves until I see it with my own eyes.
Right.
That is exactly why people were fading him, no matter how far his ADP fell.
Yep.
And they're right. They're right. He's just not the player he used to be. I love that you brought up Boyd and Higgins. And if there's one large trend to take away from this year, wow, this crop of receivers.
Yeah.
All the hype about the receivers going into the draft and then lowering our expectations because of COVID and the shortened preseason, no preseason, shortened camp, no offseason. These guys are marauding through the league.
Yeah.
And Higgins, it almost feels like we haven't even seen that close to what the best of him is going to be. He looks like one of those classic alpha receivers. The big, fluid target is going to be really tough to match up on. And we have Tyler Boyd. And will you indulge me while we're on the Bengals? Will you indulge me and tell me that my continued Auden Tate infatuation is not an illusion?
Auden Tate's a good football player. I liked him coming out of college too. He was a guy that when I watched this film, I knew the combine was going to crush his stock because he ran, what was it, 4.7 or something like that?
Right.
But I remember watching his film, and there's a few little intricacies I could see in certain players where I see, and I'm like, that's different. That's like a difference maker. And Auden Tate was a guy that when he's tracking a deep ball, he does this thing where he basically does not give the cornerback any idea the ball's coming his way. And he reacts to it at the last second. And he made a bunch of grabs that way. And it was like, all right, this guy can track a ball. He made some crazy contested catches last year when he got his opportunity. So it was really odd to see. So when they drafted T. Higgins, I was honestly shocked about it because I felt like, all right, you guys wanted to hang on to AJ Green so bad that you franchise tagged him. You have Tyler Boyd. Auden Tate stepped into a role. John Ross is going to be back healthy. what did you guys need T. Higgins for? I like T. Higgins as a player. He actually reminded me a little bit of AJ Green, where he was a deep ball tracker. The thing I loved about T. Higgins, he made everything look so easy, like almost effortless. Yeah. He's a natural football player is what he is. He's not a great route runner yet, but he'll get there. He's going to get better and better. But fortunately, being tied to Burrow is a fantastic thing, because Joe Burrow he's legit. He's everything that the Bengals thought or hoped he would be. They just need an offensive line, because if that team gets an offensive line and some semblance of friggin' defense, that team's going to be really good for a long time.
Yeah, they should be excited. And Burrow had to take his knocks because of that offensive line. But who knew that cycling out 4 of the starters would actually make things so much better? As we saw against Tennessee, they got their signature win to really start things going into the bye. They get Pittsburgh coming out of the bye. My odd and take, I'm going to say it like so many times this week, people are going to get sick of me. The Bengals, and we got to remember this. Bye weeks are about resetting priorities. Bye weeks are when teams can take a step back from the grind of the season, take a look at everything they have, more efficiently, effectively deploy what they have. And one of the points of emphasis for the Bengals is being better in the red zone, being better at finishing drives. That spells out Auden and Tate to me. I mean,
yeah, I wish they used a little more. I thought they were going to trade Green at the deadline and use Auden Tate, because it seemed like they were starting to roll him into the lineup a little bit. But right around the trade deadline, it was like, all right, is this like, are they going to move on from Green? I was hoping that Green would be traded to the Packers, but the Packers don't want to win right now because Jordan Love's not going to be ready for another 4 years.
Yeah, the Packers. That one's funny. Well, one of the things I've been bringing up a lot on the show is doing what we do, pretending that we can predict the future. It makes us look really foolish sometimes, because different teams bring out different things in opponents. Mm-hmm. And we've seen that with the Packers in dramatic fashion. You know, when they faced these physical teams like the Vikings, like the Buccaneers, most prominently, they shrink. Some might even say they're soft. I don't know if I like going down that road, but it is a way to encapsulate it. But when they have the drop on their opponent, then they look dominant. And Aaron Rodgers just puts on a show and everyone's happy. So it's going to be fascinating come playoffs, which side of them come out. They did not get a receiver. They're going to get Alan Lazard back. That's kind of like getting a receiver. Kenyon Drake. And I think that when we look back at the Kenyon Drake issue, Mike, one is that I guess Chase Edmonds didn't play in the second half of the year because of his hamstring, because even when he was active, he wasn't ready, or at the very least, he wasn't doing enough to show them that they wanted to use him. And Kenyon Drake had those games when he carried the load like he did in December a few years back for Miami and won championships for people. And then they transition tagged him. So like you said, it was reasonable to think, okay, they liked what they saw from him in that role. They're going to give him that role again. But Arizona's running game has just been so ineffective. Someone brought up in the chat room that Chase Edmonds didn't do anything in his big opportunity last week, which, you know, gives some credit to the Miami defense. That's a fun story. Yeah. That's one of the stories of the year. But yeah, Drake has been terrible. At least Drake at some point. I mean, hopefully you played him against Dallas, and we'll see. It's not necessarily totally Drake's fault, but at the same time, I think just watching Drake and Edmonds, it was pretty clear that Edmonds had a little more juice, a little more burst, had more to offer behind an offensive line that wasn't opening any holes. So there's a lot of landmines around that part of the running back crop. Yeah. Okay. Just while we're talking about Miami, in general too, in this big picture stuff, because it's been is it me, Mike, or does it feel like 9 weeks in, we've already experienced like 2 whole seasons?
It's madness. And honestly, if I didn't do this for a living, at some point, I would have just thrown my hands up in the air and said, whatever.
I just want to enjoy football again. Yeah.
Yeah, that's basically what it is, because right now it's like nonstop. It's like this player's on COVID. I'm like, wait, what team had to evacuate wait, what? And like, there's so many things to keep up with, and it's just nonstop. Where it's like, I feel like I've aged like 5 years over the last couple months. But it's crazy. It's also crazy to think. I said to my wife earlier today, I said, can you believe I've been doing this for 2.5 months this year already? Like the grind, because in season it's like, I don't know, 70 hours a week or something like that. Where it's just like trying to write the primer and get all this stuff done, and it's like 10 weeks. Holy cow. Like we're nearing the end, and then we're going to be sad when it all goes away. So I guess embrace the madness for now.
Yeah, we embrace the madness and all of these changes. I think they said 56 COVID cases in the league last week.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, I think doing the math, that's still a higher rate than the country, but I don't know. Either way, we'll watch. And they did, by the way, pass the new playoff format of 16 teams if meaningful games are canceled, which just tells me that we should expect them to push through as they have been and play every game on schedule if they can. And if they have to, they're not going to postpone a game now. They're just going to cancel it. And if it adversely affects a team, I guess they have some sort of calculation they'll make. But what from this crazy season, if I just say the 2020 season, Mike, what are some of the images that pop into your head, things that stand out looking back?
DK Metcalf.
Yeah.
This guy
is exactly. I asked Matthew Friedman this 2 weeks ago. It's exactly what he said, exactly as quickly as you.
I mean, I was higher on DK Metcalf than a lot of people were, despite his bad 3-cone drill. But I did not expect this. I mean, this guy, even, you knew he had this gauntlet of matchups coming up. You knew it was going to come Tre'Davious White, then it's Jalen Ramsey this week, and it's like, all right, DK, it's time to show them. Like, let's show it. And the reason, and this goes back to one of those hits from the preseason. I didn't want to bring him up because I think there are a lot of people who were on this bandwagon about AJ Green or about DK Metcalf, but he was someone that I said, if you want safety, I felt like Tyler Lockett was the better pick, but I said, if you're shooting for upside, like if you're one of those guys that says, I have a stable wide receiver 1, I want to shoot for the sky. Yeah. I said, DK Metcalf has actual top 5 wide receiver upside. The guy's a physical freak. He worked out with Russell Wilson all off season on his private field during this whole COVID thing. So it was like these two were developing that chemistry. And I loved on the broadcast that they talked about it because it's something that I watch, and it's not every quarterback can do it, right? Josh Allen can't do it. And he talked about Russell Wilson, basically torpedo balls. Like basically he gets the ball up in the air and it's got this arc where basically the nose of the ball dives down at the correct time. Him and DK, when you combine that with DK's ability to separate at the top end, his strength to break tackles, like if guys basically get one arm on them, they're not bringing him down. And it's just like those two magical working together. I mean, it's a marriage in that I don't think those two ever want to break that up. And honestly, you could see like legitimate all-time numbers because DK Metcalf, he doesn't lead the league in targets or anything like that, but he's up there in fantasy points. He's just, if he starts getting 8 to 10 consistent targets every single game, all of a sudden DK Metcalf is going to be the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy drafts. And I'm not even going to argue with anybody because he's tied to Russell Wilson.
Well, exactly. And that's something I preached for a long time, that when you take a receiver or tight end, you're taking the quarterback to receiver or tight end connection. But the other ingredient in that it's gonna mess with us, Mike, right? Because it's almost easier when assumption and rational coaching tells us when a coach seems stubborn, when a coach is set in their ways, they're going to always be set in their ways, and we can just turn the page and move on. But Seattle let Russ cook.
Yep.
And here we are. I mean, it's been fantastic, and it's not just affecting Russell Wilson and Seattle because it's the opponents. Right? Everybody plays their best game against Seattle. It's incredible.
Yes.
It's something that if you do this week to week. Another thing I'm going to say about Metcalf, I mean, I'll say these things again, but listeners of the show have heard me say it. I love the video of when he got the call from Pete Carroll. And I think it did kind of shake him up to fall as far in the draft as he had. And to go to Pete Carroll, who's kind of this like, I think that Matt Waldman compared him to Willy Wonka, which I like. I mean, just he's this magical, like gleeful character, Petey Sunshine. A perfect coach for DK to come to, and then DK Metcalf was the play of the year. It wasn't even as a receiver,
right?
I mean, that's the kind.
He made people forget about that whole boneheaded touchdown thing that he did, where he actually should have one more touchdown season, but that whole Deshaun Jackson showboating thing. But he made everybody forget about that, and that was the opposite of hustle. I don't know, Sig, if you had a chance to see that, I posted it on Twitter back when it happened. But Josh Reynolds, did you see him when when Jared Goff was picked against Miami?
Yeah.
Basically on that interception return for a touchdown, Josh Reynolds was the opposite of DK Metcalf, and a coach like Pete Carroll probably would have benched him. Yes,
and although Phillip Rivers and his attempt to make a tackle on Chuck Clark last week is also, it's good. I mean, these are the things that give us fuel, right? Like you talk about, like the grind or just, I mean, it's good. We're lucky to have this job creating content for this great audience. But at the same time, these plays, they fill us up with energy. These plays, they captivate us, and these players do. And yeah, DK Metcalf, you mentioned Deshaun Jackson. I think he's going to flirt with yards per reception records. I don't know what the exact record is. I know Deshaun Jackson had a year where he was around in the 20s.
Yeah.
And DK Metcalf can threaten that. Okay, since we mentioned it, Seattle's opponents. Are we back on the Josh Allen train now? Or are we saying it just depends on the matchup? Because there's a lot of players affected by this.
Yeah, I think it depends on the matchup. Quarterbacks nowadays, it's so odd. We talk about this on our DFS show every week, and I'm like, we used to play quarterbacks that we shot for as long as you can get, 15 to 20 points out of your streaming quarterback, you're happy, right? But nowadays, like, I swear, there was one week, I can't remember what week it was, maybe in week 3 or something like that, where I looked, and to finish as a top 15 quarterback, you had to have 20 fantasy points. So it's like the ceiling has been raised with quarterbacks every single week. Josh Allen's, I don't want to say he's Cam Newton's doppelganger, but he's very, very close in terms of like what they offer. Because there are times where Cam Newton, again, going back to weeks 1 and 2, people were like, the Patriots got a steal because Cam Newton, I remember that game against Seattle. He was dealing, right? He was accurate. And it was like, wait, Cam Newton's been inaccurate almost his whole career. Like, what's happening here? But it was like, it's when that happens, when quarterbacks that have that mobility are able to complete passes like that, they're unstoppable. It's like Michael Vick back when he came back with the Eagles a couple of years ago. It's probably more than a couple of years ago now. But I remember that thinking, like, how do you stop these guys? But Josh Allen, once he starts to lose confidence and second guess himself, that's when he's in big trouble because he starts getting very, very inaccurate with his downfield throws. And someone from Buffalo actually mentioned it, saying that John Brown actually has a bigger role in this offense than people think he does, because it's not so much his production, but it's more about what he does for the football team when he's out there. And I think that we've seen that, when John Brown was playing through injury or missing some time in there, that's when Josh Allen struggled his most. So getting him back, I think, definitely helps. But this is who Josh Allen is. He's just a little up and down. You're going to have to enjoy the roller coaster ride. But fortunately, not everybody's Kyler Murray. Not everybody's going to be, Justin Herbert, where they're posting top 10 numbers every single week. Even Deshaun Watson wasn't, he wasn't into that. The first 4 weeks of the season, I don't think he cracked the top 12 quarterbacks. So it happens. You just ride with it because you don't want to miss the top of the roller coaster when he gets there.
And it will really test people, Mike, because in the fantasy playoffs in week 14, Allen's going to face the Steelers. And then in week 16, he goes to Foxborough.
Yeah.
So if you have Josh Allen and you're not saying, I'm starting him ride or die, be thinking about who your backup quarterback is for week 14 and week 16. You got any skeleton key to the Colts or Ravens backfields right now? These were supposed to be really good running games. They're paired up with good defenses. But right now, I think most people are probably ready to give up on them.
Yeah, I remember the conversation we had at the beginning of the season. I said that the Ravens, I didn't know if J.K. Dobbins was even like a high-end handcuff, because I said, even if something happened to Mark Ingram, I don't know if he gets a whole lot of carries, because if you go back to last year, before Dobbins was on the roster, Justice Hill was barely involved, but it was a timeshare. Like, Mark Ingram was basically splitting half the touches with everyone else. So it was like, I don't even know if J.K. Dobbins would do that. Now, does it mean they shouldn't do that? No, Dobbins looks electric when the ball's in his hands. Gus Edwards is a fine 1-2 down back. I wish that Mark Ingram would almost stay out of the picture, because I feel like those two together can be usable fantasy assets. But once you add Mark Ingram in and his 8 to 12 touches per game, it's going to eliminate almost all value from that backfield, because again, not only do you have to worry about them vulturing each other, but you have to worry about Lamar Jackson, his rushing ability, his prowess in the red zone to run the ball in the ends in for a touchdown. But then you go over to Indianapolis, and that's somewhere where we thought this is going to be a one-man show. Is it going to be John? I thought it was going to be Jonathan Taylor. Turns out it was Marlon Mack, and then he gets hurt. It's like, okay, Jonathan Taylor, top 12 running back the rest of the season. Let's go behind that offensive line. And then all of a sudden, nobody on that team is averaging over 4 yards per carry. And it's like, what is happening? Like, the Colts offensive line isn't getting the blocking they're used to. Phillip Rivers, he has no mobility. Teams don't have to remain honest. He doesn't have wide receivers to win out there in one-on-one situations, which is a real problem. And now Jordan Wilkins has kind of made a name for himself. I said it a couple weeks ago, coming out of their bye, that we hoped Jonathan Taylor would kind of overtake that role, that we hope that they would do what the Lions did with DeAndre Swift, because once they came out of their bye, Swift had a slightly bigger role. He's still in a timeshare, but we hope the same thing for Taylor in a great matchup with Detroit. What happens? They crush against Detroit, but not because of Jonathan Taylor. Nothing he did. He's not breaking tackles. Nick Whalen, I gave him a shout out on our podcast. He did a YouTube breakdown on Jonathan Taylor, breaking down, his vision and where he's lacking. Some people were saying that he was struggling because he was worried too much about ball security when he went into the holes rather than just hitting him hard. It's almost like he took the extra second to put his overarm over the ball. And now it's like, now that he fumbled, now that he was benched, Frank Reich comes out and says, I have a level of confidence in him. What does that mean, Frank? I don't know what that means. Jordan
level.
Yeah, Jordan Wilkins is starting to feel like a bit like Raheem Mostert, but a lesser version. You know what I mean? Like where anytime he got an opportunity, he was producing. And on our podcast, I brought up because Yates goes, "Oh, Wilkins isn't an explosive guy. He's not going to average a high yards per carry." I'm like, I'm going to fact check you because Jordan Wilkins averaged over 5.8 yards per carry in each of the last 2 seasons. He's just never gotten the opportunity. They even chose to go Jonathan Williams over him last year when Marlon Mack got hurt. Nyheim Hines has never been someone they wanted to trust in the run game. So it made all the sense in the world to like Jonathan Taylor, but unfortunately, it's not really working. And I don't know if this timeshare goes away. I'm going to say that last week, it seemed like it was going to be a Jonathan Taylor week. He scored a touchdown early on, but then that fumble happened and it derailed the entire process. Does that, funnel into everything moving forward? I don't know. I wish I had the answer to this one but in the end, it might just be like the Ravens where they cannibalize each other and you can't really start with any confidence.
Yeah, it's tough. I've been looking forward to the Tennessee, Green Bay, Tennessee, Houston stretch coming up starting Thursday for the Colts. But I think you summed all that up really well. And with Taylor, he was running better before the fumble. But then, as I was saying to Cecil earlier today, it almost is like the coaches are looking for a reason to bench him now.
Yeah.
But with Wilkins and Justin Jackson, right? If you've been watching these guys the last couple of years, you'd say these running backs are good. They were late round picks. But at the same time, I always think of my man Ryan Riddle saying, early round picks have to prove they can't play. Late round picks have to prove they can. And part of the reason the teams didn't want to trust Wilkins was, I think, on the roster bubble last year coming out of camp. Mm-hmm. And this year was the questions about being on the roster bubble too. Then, what's going to happen? Health, right? With Justin Jackson last week, and we'll see about Wilkins staying healthy. And that could actually be the best path if you're holding on to Jonathan Taylor and hoping for it to bear fruit. The other thing I got to say, big picture stuff, Mike, for the second year in a row, rookie running backs have just been a trap. I mean, we would have said it at this point last year, and then Miles Sanders came on. So there's still time, but it's been bad. It's been bad.
Yeah.
I'm trying to even think, is there a James Robinson? But you probably got him on the waiver wire. Here's your leader of the running back crop that we were all so excited about, including one Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Is he going to come through, Mike? Should we look at Kansas City abandoning the run? Because earlier this year, it seemed like they were content to run when teams were saying, we'll rush 3, drop 8 into coverage, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire can have 7 yards carry. We don't care because at least Patrick Mahomes isn't throwing it. They flipped the script, which means maybe you're not checking Edwards-Helaire after the bye.
I don't know what's going on with the Chiefs run game right now. I think it has nothing to do with Clyde Edwards-Helaire because anybody that's actually sat down and watched the Chiefs games, not just box scores for fantasy numbers or anything like that, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a very, very, very good running back. He's extremely elusive. He evades tackles all the time. He's averaging 4.7 yards per carry on the season. So it's not like he's not even producing that way. He's averaging 14 carries per game. Once Le'Veon Bell showed up, it's all of a sudden that's shrinking. Now it's like under 12 carries per game. And it's like, what do we do with Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Because he's playing for this high-scoring offense, but Patrick Mahomes has had his hands on, I think, I lost the count. I'll put it in the primer again this week, but he's had his hands on all but 3 of the touchdowns for the Kansas City Chiefs. So it's like they've almost been okay with just leaving the game in Patrick Mahomes' hands. And that's why I think you're seeing some of these closer games when teams can pressure Mahomes because they're forcing him into these weird spots and he's kind of taking chances sometimes when he really shouldn't. He can get away with things that other quarterbacks really can't. But I don't think the problems with it is with Edwards-Helaire. I think it's with the overall offense right now. I don't think the offensive line is getting any push. I looked at that the other week and the yards before contact is absolutely brutal. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, going into I didn't look at it this week, but going into last week, he was tied for the league lead in broken tackles. So he's doing everything he can possibly do. Unfortunately, the Chiefs just feel like they they don't need to lean on their run game. And if there's one thing that can slow this team down in the playoffs, if they can't run the ball, or if they don't do it consistently, if Patrick Mahomes has an off game, because every quarterback can do it. Like, I mean, let's look what happened to Tom Brady on Sunday night. Every quarterback can go through that. They need to be able to run the ball more consistently. And Le'Veon Bell's not the answer. He's definitely not the answer, because Le'Veon Bell's just way past the prime. Like, he's done. Like, he's a backup. That's what he is. Yeah.
I mean, still worth an end of the bench spot, because we roster all the backup running backs this time of year. Mm-hmm. But you're right. And it's going to be interesting to see how Kansas City handles this in terms of their balance on offense and what they can do. And they've got matchups. The second half of the schedule includes matchups against Vegas, who beat them, Tampa, Miami, who's the new kid on the block in terms of defenses that can be a thorn in your side, New Orleans. And we saw what New Orleans did to Tom Brady. So Kansas City, some real fascinating games left on the schedule. And then, of course, what will come in the playoffs. You mentioned the primer, and I always just assume at this point, because we're all so familiar with each other, but you all know Mike Tagliere, NFL, Fantasy Pros, the Fantasy Pros podcast. Always wonderful. Always enjoyed any time I get to spend over there. But you talk about the primer, your blood, sweat, and tears, heart and soul. Yeah. Give me something, Mike. It could be from a recent week. It could be something from earlier this year, that as you're doing the voluminous work that you do to put together the primer, that surprised you, that you had to go back and say, is that right? And sure enough, it was. And you yourself changed your own mind, not just the mind of a reader, while you're putting that together.
There's a lot of different things, honestly. And I wish that I could point out one thing, because there are things every week that I'll put up there and in that article. And then I'll be like, oh, I got to tweet this out, and I'll do it. Like, there was one earlier this week that I posted. There are just, where's this? I'm going to find it so I can tell you. So there are just 3 running backs who have accounted for 100% of their team's carries inside the 5-yard line. Derrick Henry, James Robinson, makes sense. Josh Adams. So Josh Adams basically played one game with the Jets, and he got 1 carry inside the 5-yard line, and that's all they've had this entire season. So that was those are things that I find, because so when writing this article, Sig, I don't know if you do the same thing, but I've been doing it. This is the 4th year I've been doing it now, and I want to learn something myself, and I want to almost surprise myself as I'm writing it, and I want to learn something new. So it leads me further and further and further down this rabbit hole of trying to find new information, because, I mean, people could read this every week and say, oh, wow, I learned something here. But at the same time, when you're doing it every week, it's like, I need to keep surprising myself. And sometimes you almost want to overthink the process just because you have to satisfy your own personal things. But it's fun doing every single week. I mean, it is a time grab, and it does consume a lot of time. But at the same time, I do it because I want to do it. I do it because I enjoy the game. I enjoy learning about the game and sharing what I learn about it with you guys.
Yeah. And it's fun because and it doesn't just apply to being a fantasy analyst, our made up job that we get to continue to do as long as the world lets us get away with it. Any kind of job, if you're doing the work where the work is its own reward and the work makes you better at future work, then you found that golden thread to follow. And we're very, very lucky to get to do that. And absolutely, sometimes you ask questions to see what the answer is, and the answer will surprise you. I think that's what analytics are good for. I'm not anti-analytics. Right. I think they have a great place in all these football discussions, but they bring up questions to ask. But it's always answered. The last word always comes on the field. And let's go ahead and turn the page. It's not quite 10 minutes left, but let's turn the page anyway. Just go off the rails on the couch here, Mike. 2020. Whew. I know we've talked to each other at least a few times since this year. And even with all the crazy things that have been packed into 2020, there's been these overtures and acts and the big opera. But before we started today, you were mentioning something about winter in Chicago. I know you've got a connection to Chicago. What's the best thing about living in Chicago?
The best thing. I love the people. Chicago gets a bad rap for the people that live here, but overall, I'd say it's a good town. It's a good city. It's a good state. Most of the people are good-hearted. There's obviously bad neighborhoods. There's bad neighborhoods everywhere, but the state's in a real problem right now in terms of the debt, in terms of what they're charging people for taxes, what they're doing all over the place. You don't get any land here, so we made the family decision that we're going to move out to Tennessee. after the
Ooh.
season. So basically, once the season ends, actually, in middle of January, during the playoffs, I'm going to take a ride. The wife and I are just going to go right out there and just legitimately just drive through towns, looking at the towns that we've kind of narrowed it down to, because we're looking just a little bit outside of Nashville. I want like, man, Sig, all I want is like, you get older, right? And then your priorities change, your wants change, and the things that you appreciate change. And I just want serenity, and nothing says that more than like, living on like 5 acres of land and just looking out. It's just nothing but trees out there, like, just like quiet. And I'm just looking forward to getting away from the busy, life here in Illinois, and just like having that to walk outside and feel at ease. That's what I want as I get older.
That makes a lot of sense. Tennessee's, there's a lot of great things in Tennessee. Joe Bryant lives in Tennessee, in Knoxville. I remember taking a look at Chattanooga when we were looking at places to move to. Chattanooga, it's super affordable, beautiful place, and that's great. Good luck with the move. Yeah. So, what's something that's not good? Well, you mentioned the tax. I guess you already answered the question when you said the taxes. I'll riff on Chicago a little bit too, because my favorite movie growing up, as I've mentioned before, I keep bringing up, it's The Couch. I keep bringing up my childhood. Yeah. Like, I had no supervision when I was a child. I watched R-rated movies from when I was like 4 or 5 years old. Whenever I'd stay up and watch when HBO was this brand new thing, and The Blues Brothers was my favorite movie, probably until I was like, I don't even know what replaced it, Do the Right Thing or something like that, when I got more socially conscious when I was a teenager. And I think it captured Chicago well. Like, what do you say about the people? There's lots of iconic images of Chicago. But when I tell this story, Mike, what was little Mike's favorite movie?
It's weird to say it, but it's actually a Chicago-based movie, and it's Gladiator. It's not the Russell Crowe one. It's a boxing movie that not a lot of people have seen. So it's got Cuba Gooding Jr. in it. Yep. Brian Dennehy's in it. It's about a kid that basically moves from a good neighborhood into the south side of Chicago, and he's trying to make some money, and then he's offered a shot to box, and it was just like, I'll take a boxing match. And it's just about an underdog. There's a million movies about underdog, boxers, right. Baseball. Like, that doesn't matter. I always liked sports growing up. And the fact that it was in Chicago made me feel a little bit closer to the movie. Ferris Bueller's Day Off is definitely up there as another Chicago movie. Like, we've been fortunate, and there's things about Chicago I'm definitely going to miss. Even the show Shameless. I don't know if you watched the show Shameless, but I know,
but I haven't watched it yet.
Oh man, that show! If
William H. Macy, right?
Yeah, he's so damn good. But if you plan on watching Shameless, if you're like listening to this and you're like, oh, I got to check out that show, I want you to understand you're going to hate that show for like the first like 3 episodes. And it's not because you're going to hate it because it's bad acting or anything like that, bad storyline. It's because you have to come to terms with the fact that this is how people actually live in some Chicago, in some of the projects basically that they came from, and what they do to survive. And families are actually like this. Like, I know people that have gone through it, and it's like, it maddens you at first, but then you start learning about the characters, you start loving the characters. It's just so well written, and I think they just went into their 10th season, so they've obviously been doing something.
Yeah. Well, humanity, right? It's just like finding humanity everywhere.
Yes, there's a good story with everybody, Sig. And this week in the primer, at the beginning, I always try to write something that's not football related, because I think it's an outlet for me to talk about something that's not football, because honestly, even if I hang out with friends or whatever, a lot of time they're asking me about football. So it's my one time to like talk about something that's not football. And the message this week that you guys will read about when it comes out in a couple of days is that it's about like basically what other people say to you and how they act towards you. That says who they are. How you react to that says who you are. There's only one thing that you're in control of. There's a lot of negativity in this world right now. There's a lot of people saying that I was right, you were wrong. There's a lot of people saying that I didn't like you did this, so I'm going to do this. Just stop and start treating people better. Like, seriously, the only thing you can control is what you do. So if you wouldn't want someone to do something to you, don't do it to them. It's such a simple thing, but I don't think people have it broken down like that. And it's something, again, the statement is what somebody says to you is who they are. What you say back to them says who you are. That's it.
Yes. It's what I am fond of saying, Mike, is we don't get to decide the story that we're in or how that story turns out. but the part that we play in it. But it's it's hard to not come back to like the larger story that's going on, right? Because there's just no, we're not going to settle it. We're certainly not going to settle it like in the last 5 minutes, and that's not necessarily what we're here for, and that's not why you're listening. But I think you're right to say the important thing to do now is just to focus back on yourself, or even like your quest right now to find your 5 acres of land in Tennessee, just to focus on your life, yourself, the light and the goodness and love that you can bring into the world in your circle, and not necessarily all of us seeing our lives in this larger context, because, well, it's not good for your mental health if you do it all the time. I can attest to that. And also, I think that divide and conquer, I think that there's a larger story where the more that we see each other as enemies, the less we can summon up energy to make things better for ourselves on an individual level and on a collective level. So, okay, so Gladiator. Were you into boxing? Did you watch a lot of boxing growing up?
Hell yes, I did. I even did some Muay Thai for a little while myself, but I'm such a competitive person where when I get into something, it's like I go all in, right? Like it's one of those things that my wife loves about me, but she also probably hates it, because like when I dive into something, like when I picked up my guitar again, like when I started playing that again, it was like every day I was picking up and playing it. But then when I put it down, it's kind of like away, and it's like wasting money and stuff like that. But Muay Thai, it's so competitive in that if you want to be really, really good at it, you need to work at it. And I just didn't have the time I needed to dedicate to that, as well as trying to work at fantasy football when I was. So I ultimately chose to go away from it, but I enjoyed it when I did it. But it's so competitive that I almost didn't want, I wanted to get better, but the time needed to invest in it. And I still enjoy it. Unfortunately, boxing, it kind of faded. In terms of public perception back from like the Tyson days, because that's basically in my heyday, right? That was in my prime growing up watching Mike Tyson. But I still love boxing. I still love, like, I'll watch UFC a little bit. I used to be a little bit more into it, but nowadays it's like when I have time away from work, it's just trying to do things that basically don't bring out the competitive side in me.
Right.
It's more like, just like I said, the whole serenity idea and just relaxing and enjoying some time with the family.
Yeah, I kind of feel sorry for folks. I'm just old enough that, and my stepfather was a professional boxer, and I would go to the gym with him. I've told stories on the show about it before. He trained a lot of boxers that I'm sure a lot of people have heard of. Roberto Duran came to the gym to train out in the woods outside of California, PA, Granville Hollow. Anyway, back when I was a kid, during the heyday of like Hagler Hearns, Leonard Hagler, Leonard Duran, that weight division.
Yep.
Those fights were bigger than the Super Bowl. I mean, when those fights were happening, the whole world came to. So my parents would go to the movie theater and watch it with everybody at the movie theater in like Charleroi, PA, like a little Mid-Mon Valley town. It was like a gala event, when these, and it was incredible. And it was much like what we enjoy about football. It was these forces that are so strong and so well defined, but different. And what happens when you put them together? Yep. And how's the outcome? And you could just skip to the end and say who won, but it's the how. It's the how it unfolds. It's the ebbs and flows that really make boxing. It was so captivating. But like you said, it's still there, but it doesn't have. I mean, there was a time for a long time, I think, that it was right there with any other sport for America's attention. And you can definitely see why. Who are your favorite guitarists? Who are your influences?
Steve Vai just passed away, which really sucks.
What?
Steve Vai was a great guitarist.
I didn't even see that. Are you kidding?
Yeah, he died. That sucked.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I'm a fan of guys that experiment quite a bit. Like I like Kirk Hammett when it comes. Like I think he's actually a great guitarist, a great soloist. It's more of commercial type guitar, and I understand that some people don't like that, but I think there's a rhythm to his solos that I absolutely love. I'm a big Korn guy. But those guys using the 7 strings and all the effects that they use, that's the part where it's like, that requires so much imagination, because I could learn to play a song, like basically a riff. You go through AC/DC or whatever you want to play, and you learn a riff, and that's cool. Like, I learned Stranglehold not too long ago, Ted Nugent. But it's like playing with those effects and like learning to make these neat sounds sound like somehow uniform. And they do it so magnificently as a duo too, because doing it as one person, knowing what you're doing is one thing, but doing it as a duo and knowing what the other person's doing and how it's kind of like a yin yang thing where they need each other to balance each other out. And it's I enjoy listening to those guys. So I know it's not a popular opinion in terms of like the hardcore guitarists like Jimi Hendrix back in the day, who was extremely talented. It's just all about what your ear wants to hear, what you want to play, what you appreciate. There's just a whole bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, there is. It's incredible. And I don't think, speaking about fact checking, I don't think Steve Vai died.
I thought he
At
did.
least I can't. It's I just don't, because I'm a Zappa guy. So when you say Steve Vai, actually he played on that Zappa Plays Zappa, the first comeback tour.
Maybe it was a fake rumor or something. I thought he did.
I'm happy to break that good news to you, but I like when you talk about those guitarists. I'm thinking of like Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine, where it's almost like they're not even playing the physical strings.
Exactly,
they're playing like a wave of energy,
yep.
And they're just altering this wave of energy, and it's much more beyond the physical instrument. It's a sense of creating like a soundscape. And so, yeah, it's awesome. There's so much. Music is another thing. Just go on and on and on forever about with the way that it's captivating and inspiring. Like Mike Tagliere's work at FantasyPros, and always happy to have him in the couch in the middle of it. Week 10, folks. And again, perseverance will continue to be rewarded. It's like week 17 is already here, looking at the running back scores. But that just means it's time to be creative, hang on, and continue to consume work of people like Mike. And we appreciate that you let us be in your life at Football Guys too. Folks, we always want to be part of your life, part of your football season, because you're so very classy.